I'd like to talk to you for a few moments about something Donald Craybill calls the upside down kingdom. In building a foundation for visionary leadership, again, I stress we have to understand that the kingdom is inverted. It doesn't function like the kingdom of the world. But you see, we live in a context as Westerners where we think about life from a hierarchical, representative, democratic structure. We naturally tend to think the world would be better off if everyone had the same worldview as we did here in North America. You see, sometimes I believe our worldview makes it difficult for us to see the real Jesus because he comes to us through the filters of 20 centuries of church history. And our images of him come from all kind of places. Sunday school lectures, storybooks, bumper stickers, angry pastors on street corners holding up signs, theological words we can hardly understand, being drugged to church as a kid with our parents and resenting them for it. I mean, there's just all these things that have shaped us as believers or even shaped us as non-believers. But at the end of the day, I believe we have tamed Jesus to fit neatly into our culture and our reality and the day and age in which we live. I believe for us to learn to genuinely understand the mission of God and the call of Christ, we're going to have to peel away some of our preconceived ideas. And when we start doing that, the Jesus we find might startle us a bit. You see, Jesus was not politically correct. He was often irreverent to society's elite, especially the religious elite. The Gospels certainly don't always portray Jesus as a quiet little shepherd boy walking beside still waters. In fact, he stirred the political water so much during his day that he got the Roman electric chair. I mean, he got the death penalty because he stirred that scene so much from a political perspective. Now, I speak to you as an American because that's my context. That's who I am. I was born into privilege. America's my setting. It's how I view reality. It's how I view the world. And I'm constantly trying to reshape that from a Christian worldview. But at the end of the day, I view the world from a standpoint of privilege. And so does anybody else living here. Because in the global context, I'm wealthy simply because I live in the United States and have an income and hold a professional job. Visionary leaders, however, understand, this is again foundational. They understand that the gospel may sound different to people in other places. To people living in third world countries who have to search for food and shelter every day just to survive, the gospel may sound different. It'll carry a different meaning for someone who is serving a life sentence for murder. It'll carry a different meaning for someone who is forced to drink dirty water every day, or someone who is dying of AIDS, or someone being tortured for their faith. Now, regardless of one's social status, or the burdens that they carry, or whether they be wealthy or poverty-stricken, or have good health, or suffer with illness, thanks be to God. Thanks be to God that the gospel is filled with enough grace. There's enough room for everybody to partake. It's God's will that all come to repentance. And God calls visionary leaders to learn to see beyond the cultural conditions of our society, to learn to see beyond the social status of people in the world. Now, spiritually speaking, I'd say modern culture misses the mark. We get it wrong. We celebrate often in the church the same thing the world celebrates. And we forget that from a kingdom perspective, that up is down, that down is up, that the last shall be first, and the first shall be last. On October 7th, 1950, Mother Teresa received permission to start her own order, the Missionaries of Charity, whose primary task was to love and care for the very people that nobody else was prepared to look after. And this group became a giant in its impact in the world of the suffering and those that were hurt and sick, the have-nots of society. Later, Mother Teresa was interviewed about her ministry to the poor, and when she first came into the room where they were to conduct the interview, the journalist was a little startled. He didn't realize that she was this small in structure or stature, standing only 4'11" tall. She was such a small lady, yet a giant to the people that she ministered to during her 6 decades in India. Her friends, the people she spent her life with, were people who were starving, people who were dying, people who were poor. This young reporter was mesmerized by this gentle woman who went on to win the Nobel Peace Prize because she had seen more poverty in her life than anyone had ever been met with. And speaking from the festering slums where she had made her simple home, she was surprised that the reporter was surprised to hear her express pity as she talked about the poverty-stricken West, talking about North America and Europe. Here's what she said. The spiritual poverty of the Western world is much greater than the physical poverty of our people. You in the West have millions of people who suffer such terrible loneliness and emptiness. They feel unloved and unwanted. These people are not hungry in the physical sense, but they are hungry in another way. They know they need something more than money, yet they don't know what it is. What they are missing really is a living relationship with a living God. The poor teach us contentment. That is something you don't have much of in the West. This giant of a woman in her faith has brought about an interesting point in this quote. Something we need to think about when Jesus tells us to minister to the least of these. Because really, we could all fit into that category.